Hello and welcome to another edition of Level Design using UDK.
This practical tutorial is designed to teach you how to export your meshes and textures and import them into UDK.
As usual, Joshua and myself are here to guide you through this process.
Now previously, through the series we have concentrated on using Unreal's assets when creating levels, and recently developing your own assets for this purpose.
Now, we have finished and textured our models in previous tutorials, and it's time to export them for use within UDK to create your own levels. We will be looking at exporting your mesh and checking its settings, exporting your textures, and then finally importing them into UDK for future use. Now we have our model, it is important to double check all the information due to problems which could arise later on, as mistakes made during this process are not as easily repaired after this stage, especially if you are creating lots of modular objects.
The other main points that need to be checked are sizes of the asset, naming conventions, and the original position and orientation of the asset. Firstly, we need to make sure it is positioned and aligned correctly.
So, using the grid, which has been used throughout, check your sizes and proportion of the model, remembering 8 SUU is half a foot in real world units.
Okay, so we have the actual main position of the object at the moment centered directly below the object at the aligned location. If it's not where you'd like it to be, click on the Hierarchy tab, go down to Effect Pivot Only, and then make sure snapping is turned on, so once you move your object it will snap to the grid. Okay, so now our position is off target. If we wanted it to be centered onto the object, we click Center to the object, but we also want it to be positioned to the base of the object, so when we place it in UDK it flushes to the static meshes. Now that is done, all we have to do is unclick Effect Pivot Only.
Now what you want to do is set the position at 0, 0, 0, as UDK will register the pivot at the centre of the max file no matter where your model is.
Okay, so if your mesh is off from the actual centre of the max pivot point, all you have to do is come down to here, hit right click on each of these triangular dialers to make sure it sets the X, Y and Z value at 0 for each.
Naming of the model is important to make sure you're using the correct mesh within the engine, which can relate to its custom collision data created in earlier tutorials. So make sure, once you have named the mesh, the collision mesh has the same name, but beginning with the pretext UCX underscore.
Okay, so we have under here, under the Modify tab, the actual original mesh's name as Tank01, so we'll copy that, and we'll now unhide the collision mesh which was created earlier. So we unhide all, and here's our mesh. As you can see, it covers the entire original mesh, not allowing a player to be able to run through it at all. So if we take that and we go UCX underscore, and we'll just paste back in the name of Tank01.
It is best to clear the material from the model to give a clean path when importing into UDK. When we have all this in place, it is best to reset the X form of your models, because if the changes made have been known to skew the orientations within UDK.
Okay, to change the X forms of the models, select each module, go to the Utilities tab, reset X form, reset selected, go over to Modify tab and collapse to changing it back into an editable poly, and you have to do this for the collision mesh as well.
After you've done all of the previous steps, you're now ready to export. Make sure you only have the mesh and its collision data selected, and click on the File Export Selected. So, this is so if you have any hidden models in the scene, which can happen when developing, and you forget about them as they are also not exported.
Okay, so we now have that selected and ready to export. We will name the export Tank01 underscore SM for static mesh. So once you've imported into UDK, you know exactly what you're using, and we'll hit save. And you have to make sure that these selections are set for the static mesh options: mesh definition, materials, mesh normals, mapping coordinates, geometry and shapes. If it was animated, or if we had a boned object, we would have to change the selections for a different corresponding export setting, which we'll go through later on a later tutorial.
Naming conventions are extremely important when creating a package with lots of meshes and maps to find what you're looking for quickly and efficiently when creating your maps. Now we have Photoshop open with the textures ready to be used as materials in UDK. We need to save each of these as Targa with the correct naming conventions.
Okay, so we have here our Photoshop file with our diffuse map, our normal map, and our spec map. What we need to do is, once that's open, we get File, Save As, find a location you want to save it to, and we'll call it tank01 underscore texture underscore diff for our diffuse map, and we will save it as a Targa, and make sure it's at a 24 bits compression section due to UDK's material editor. And sometimes if Targa isn't available, it might be because your mode is set as CMYK or lab color. Just go back and select RGB and it will be available for you, and you need to do this for all your maps.
Now, with UDK open up the generic browser. When this is done, click on Import and select the mesh and textures you wish to import into UDK.
Open.
Now we have these ready to import, there are just a few settings we need to adjust. Firstly, we need to set a package for which the assets are to be included in. This can be done by selecting a ready-made package or by creating our own.
Okay, so you've got your ready-made packages here, which come standard with UDK, have all the meshes, textures and other assets which are included. But we are going to start and we will rename this tutorial package, making sure it is either camel case or using underscores because it won't recognise spaces.
We also have a group function to easily tag assets in certain groups. To keep ours simple for now, we will name the mesh, and textures, textures.
Okay, so we have here the importation screen for the mesh. Everything is standard and fine, so we will hit OK. And sometimes this message will appear. There's no need to worry about that. That is just UDK being a bit cautious sometimes. Now we have our diffuse texture, which is fine as standard, so we'll hit OK again. And our normal map texture. For this, we want to change our compression settings to normal map. This is so UDK doesn't compress it as much, and we can keep the same quality for when UDK tries to create the shaders for the actual object. And import that back to OK, and the spec map can be set as default again, and OK.
And that's it! Your assets are now ready to use in your levels. We've just quickly and easily covered how to take your assets, place them for use in UDK, and we will detail how to ready these assets for optimum use in the coming tutorials. Thanks for watching.